Hi, this is Bill Ringle, host of My Quest for the Best, where we meet business, thought, and community leaders and talk about issues relevant to entrepreneurial growth. Joining us today is Jill Konrath. Jill is an internationally recognized expert, popular speaker, and best-selling author whose career is defined by her relentless search for fresh sales strategies that actually work in today's business environment. Her first book, Selling to Big Companies, addresses the major sales problem of how to set up meetings with prospects who'd rather avoid salespeople altogether. Fortune magazine named it one of the 8 must-reads for sellers. When the economy tanked in 2008, Jill wrote Get Back to Work Faster, a game-changing career book. Snap Selling, Jill's highly acclaimed new book, jumped to the #1 spot on Amazon within hours of its release. Jill's newsletters are read by 70,000 readers worldwide, and she writes a popular blog that's been syndicated on numerous business and sales websites. Jill is also frequently quoted in top business media. Welcome, Jill.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Jill, not many people grow up thinking that they want to excel in sales. How did you first get your start?
Well, not wanting to excel in sales was exactly how I felt. It was not something I wanted to do at all. In fact, I was mortified and disgusted by the entire profession of sales, which I saw as people like used car salespeople or people call you on the phone and try to get you at dinner time. But I actually went into sales because I had an idea for a business. And I worked with several friends to put this idea into a nice business plan, and we went to the Service Corps of Retired Executives. And they said, this is really a timely business plan. The concept is spot on. We can really see that this would grow. You've got the expertise to pull it off. And then they looked at the 3 of us and they said, which one of you 3 now will be doing the selling? And we looked at each other. I looked at Val. Val looked at me. I looked at Dennis. Dennis was looking at me. Neither of them were looking at each other. And it suddenly dawned on me that they thought that I was going to step forward and take that horrible role in the organization. So I turned to the guy from SCORE and I said, I thought you said this was a really good idea. And he said, it is, but somebody has to sell it. So the net is I became the designated person in our group to learn how to sell so that we could then launch our business plans. But I did get hired by Xerox at that point after I made it my mission to get hired in a sales profession. And once I got with Xerox, I recognized it was something entirely different, and thus began the career path that I've been on ever since.
How do you maintain your focus on sales when there's so many things that distract people from selling effectively?
Well, that's a good question. How do I maintain my focus? I think I maintain my focus, and I encourage other people to maintain their focus on sales, because if they don't do it, they won't be able to do what they really love to do. And I know I've worked with a lot of small businesses in the past and consultants and different people like that, and the reality is it's easy to get pulled off and to do things that they're exciting right now or they make you feel busy. But the truth of the matter is that unless you dedicate a portion of your life to actually going after the business, you will be financially on edge at all times. And so it's a function of knowing that it has to be done and doing it because it has to be done in order to be viable.
And then the next step, of course, is if you know it's necessary, you know that you're responsible for doing it, why in the world would you not want to do it with the right training, insight, tools, and support to be successful?
Well, that is a good logical question that one would, seem to, evolve from what you're saying. But the truth of the matter is I see so many people who are living with this old perception of sales. They think it's it's about pitching and it's about going forward and touting their stuff. And they've invested no time to actually learn what it means to be successful in sales. And I mean, they don't read about it. They don't study it as a learnable skill. They think they either have it or they don't have it. And most of them who don't like it just assume that they're not the kind who can sell and don't have that capability. But the truth of the matter is everybody has the capacity and the capability to sell. It is a skill. Some people start out with some talents that make it easier for them, but the best salespeople, the best entrepreneurs, the best business owners, the best seller of ideas are people who actively look and learn to study what it takes to make things happen in this arena.
And there are barriers that they encounter, I'm sure. What are some of the barriers that people talk to you about that they need your help to overcome?
Probably the biggest barrier I'm seeing right now is inability to set up meetings with decision makers. Over the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen a number of technologies emerge that totally protect decision makers from ever having to talk to a human being. And because people are so crazy busy these days, they're using them all the time. I mean, I talk to a number of people who say, I'm not able to talk, I'm not able to get anybody on the phone anymore. And that's true, because decision makers are now looking at their phones to see who's calling in. They're seeing if it's a number that they recognize. If it's not, they let it roll directly to email. Salespeople or business owners will send emails out to connect with a potential prospect, and they'll never hear any response. And so the biggest issue I'm seeing right now is just the sheer inability to get enough prospects in the pipeline to support the business.
And what are a couple ways of overcoming those barriers if people are protecting themselves with layers of technology this way?
Yeah, well, there is only one way, and that's to get smart about it. I mean, people are actually looking for some magic dust out there. They're hoping that if I can just sprinkle a few of the right words on them, that they will, magnetically attract people to them. That's not what happens. The reality of it is, if you want to get more customers, if you want to set up more meetings with potential buyers, then you literally have to study what it takes and figure out what business issues that you solve for your clients, the business ramifications and the impact of these of what you do on their key business drivers, and then you need to literally craft messaging that doesn't ramble on and on about your company, but actually focuses in on what they're interested in at all times.
Do you have an example of an organization or individual business owner that you worked with where you're able to take them from being ineffective at setting up those meetings and developing a rhythm and a system in their business where they were able to consistently produce the results that they wanted?
I see this happening actually all the time, and I get emails from people all the time thanking me for my book because it's a very systematic book in terms of here's the process that you go through. I have one large corporation, and I worked with their national accounts team, and their national accounts team was trying to call on some of the biggest companies in the nation, big companies. And so I was working with some talented professionals, and they were struggling to set up meetings as well because they were blocked from reaching a decision maker. And so after working with them, and actually in this specific situation, each rep was asked to target one specific account that they'd been trying to get into or really wanted to get into, but had been unsuccessful in prior to the workshop that we did with them. And 2 months after the workshop, 87% of the salespeople had landed meetings with their targeted accounts. Now, these were with huge accounts, and so one win could make a year's worth of business for any one of those salespeople. But the reality is when you put a system in place and you understand that there's a process and methodology for getting meetings, then you can get in. Most people give up way too soon. They have lousy verbiage, and they pretty much suck at it.
And I bet that's very intimidating. If they aren't getting the results, that reinforces the fact that they don't have the skills in that area. So it must give them a lot of confidence to use a process that you know is going to help them get results, and they could see that happening.
Right. It really does help people because they really do get discouraged, and they think, well, I just don't have the right genes for this, or clearly they're not interested because they're not getting back at me, or even so much as pointing fingers and saying they're absolute idiots. This is the best thing since sliced bread, and they don't get how we can help our business. So I see a lot of finger pointing. I see a lot of people getting real discouraged because it's not happening to them. But the reality of it is they haven't studied what works, and they keep making more calls badly. And the worst thing in the world you can do if you want to, if you want to keep yourself from getting, the worst thing you do that leads to depression is to make more calls badly, because then you just get more and more rejection, and it's a spiraling downward type of thing that happens. Not good.
Yeah. And the initial response to a lot of this is that people do blame others, or they blame the environment, or they blame that the company doesn't get, their prospects don't get how much value that they're offering.
Right.
And that really doesn't solve the problem, does it?
It doesn't solve the problem at all, Bill. All it does is it makes you feel a little bit self-righteous that it's not about you. But ultimately, if you're not selling and you're an entrepreneur or you're a salesperson, it does come back to it is about you. And until you choose to learn and study what it takes to be successful, you'll continue to get some of those same results.
Tell me what inspired you to write Snap Selling?
Well, Snap Selling itself was written because of my own some of the sales challenges I was running into, and this relates to getting appointments, but it also relates to working with prospects who had appeared to be interested in you and then suddenly disappeared into a black hole. A few years back, I started to see that this was a real common theme. I'd managed to master a process that would allow me to get into a lot of conversations with potential prospects, and in many cases, they were very, very interested in working with me. But suddenly, they would literally go radio silent, and I would send out an email to them saying, I'm just following up to set up that meeting where we were going to talk about this, and I wouldn't hear back from them. I'd phone them phone them up, and I'd leave a message, and I'd say, I'm just following up, see if we can touch base about that project you want to go ahead with, and they would never get back to me. And again, at first, I just assumed they were busy, and then when they didn't get back to me after a while, I thought, did I misread the situation? I could have sworn they were interested. And then finally, when they still didn't get back to me, I thought, what did I do to cause them to be upset with me? And so then I would actually apologize to people and say, I don't know if I did something to upset you or, say something that, really offended you, but, I thought you were really interested in moving ahead. And what I discovered when I would get to that point and I'd write those emails to people, they'd write back and say, oh, my God, Jill, we are still interested. It's just things are crazy busy around the office right now. My priorities have switched a little bit, and my plate is too full. And at that point, I started to realize, again, that this was a phenomena that we're running into. We are seeing so many companies where people are stretched so thin that they're unable to tackle and take on additional project work, and they're just trying to keep their head above water. So once again, because I like to solve sales problems, I figured out there's got to be a way to work with these people to help them achieve their objectives, because that's what sales really is all about, to help them achieve their business objectives, and at the same time keep the sale moving forward so I could reach my objectives.
First, what is it that, help us understand, because I think everyone who runs a business and has been involved in this has run into the radio silence and just been frustrated as all get out. I know that's happened to me. Just like you said, I thought that everything was on track and we were going to be doing business within a week or so.
Right.
And it's difficult to get past that. What is it that we need to understand in order to move productively once you encounter that situation?
Can I backtrack a little and say what I think we need to understand altogether, and then specifically answer that question?
Absolutely.
Because I think that'll help. The book, my most recent book, is called Snap Selling, and SNAP is an acronym of the 4 things that customers or prospects are constantly evaluating us on at all times. The reason I'm mentioning this is because it's a black hole problem, and it's what's causing people to snap. And literally, like I said, SNAP is an acronym. It's causing people to snap and not go forward with you. In all cases, what I discovered is that crazy busy people are evaluating our 4 criteria. The S is simplicity. The N is the invaluableness of your work. The A is the alignment with their business objectives, and the P is priorities. So when something is happening, for example, even when you're placing a phone call to somebody or writing them an email message, they are looking at your email message and they're saying, is it simple or is it complex? And believe me, they don't give you a 5 on the rating scale of 1 to 10. You either are simple or you're overwhelmingly complex. You're writing an email that gets to the point, or you're writing a rambling one that goes on and forever and bores them to death. The second thing they're looking for is you personally sounding like you bring value. And they're listening to see if you sound like every other sales rep who's contacting them, or if you actually sound like you have ideas, insights, information, which makes you an invaluable resource, which, by the way, in SNAP starts with an N, a little I, capital N, invaluable. And then they're listening to see if you're aligned with their business objective. You either are aligned with what they're trying to achieve and they clearly get it because it's spelled out so well that they can't not get it, or you're nice to have but not right now. And finally, there's the priority part of SNAP, which is people will always focus on their key priorities, whatever's the most important right now. And if it's non-urgent, they will delay what's happening. So knowing that those are the four factors, and you either are aligned or you're not aligned. You're either on a priority or you're not a priority. You either sound like, an intelligent human being who contributes value, or you sound like somebody who's peddling your stuff. And you make it simple. All those factors are going into their decisions every day, all the time. So the first thing I always say to people is you need to focus on prevention so you don't get yourself into that hole. And we can talk about that too, but let's just talk about now when they've disappeared in that black hole, what do you do? The first thing that you do is you never touch base. And that's what I see a lot of people doing. I know we talked, Bob. I'm just circling back to see if, you're ready to move ahead, or I'm touching base to see if anything has changed, or I'm checking in to see if we can get that on the calendar yet. All that does is those are nuisance messages, and they don't bring out any high priorities. They don't align with their business objectives. They don't showcase you as an intelligent human being, and they're essentially worthless messages. So what should a person do? A person should realize that they have to put the priorities in their messaging. They have to sound like they've got the ideas, and they have to be aligned. So instead of me calling up and saying, "Hi, Bob, I'm just checking in to see if you've decided to go ahead with your sales training program, and if we're ready to get that on the calendar," I would call up and I'd say, "Hi, Bob, Jill Konrath getting back to you. As we mentioned when we talked a week ago, new client acquisition is a critical thing with you. And I've been thinking about some things we might want to do as we put the project in place. Let's set up a time to talk about that and move this thing forward." And so I'm not talking about my training program. I'm talking about the issue that my training program addresses, which is new client acquisition. And I'm focused on continuing the conversation to move it forward, so helping him achieve his objectives, not trying to sell you something. I'm just waiting here to see if we can move ahead. So there's a fundamental shift that it's all about them, and you have to remind them of the business value of what you're doing at all times and align it with key priorities that are important to them. Make sense?
It really helps. Oh, yeah, it helps you tune in to show that you're there as an ally, not looking to take something, but help them achieve something.
Yes. And that is a major, major shift. And if we take a look at how most people behave when they're in the sales process, they believe their job is pitching and differentiating their product from everybody else's out there, or differentiating their services from anybody else's out there. And this is the part where they really kind of hate it, because they're having to tout their stuff, and it just feels cheesy and icky to them. And it's cheesy and icky to a prospect too. Nobody cares about our products or services, just us. And the truth of the matter is that 95% of the people we're contacting are not actively making a decision. And yet a huge number of them would be willing to consider changing if they saw that there was a better alternative out there. And what pitching is it's focused on differentiating from your competition and telling how wonderful you are. And those are behaviors that only apply, number one, if somebody's in the final stages of making a decision. They've already committed funding to it. They're determined to go ahead. Then they want to know how you're different. But if they're not talking about changing, and there's no money in the budget per se for making a decision in this area, then the entire focus has to be on the business issues that the client is facing that are addressable by your products or services, and how you can help them achieve the objectives that they've set out for themselves this year.
So it's important to research your clients and find out what their objectives are. And if it's difficult to find that out in advance, I bet there are ways to do it as part of the conversation.
Yes, there are. And let me just say, first of all, researching people ahead of time is an imperative today, especially when you're calling on higher-level decision makers or people from bigger companies. There is a barrier of entrance. There's a price you have to pay to get your foot in the door, and that's to show that you've done your homework. So it's really, really important to do that research. Now, I have a lot of people say to me, "Well, Jill, how would I know, I haven't talked to them. How would I know it? And their website doesn't say what their objectives are. And the truth of the matter is there are some things that we have to assume these days. And when I first began my sales career, I was told that one must never assume, and that every client believed he or she was unique, and you had to go in there with a clean slate, and your whole way of talking should be focused on, I'd love to understand your needs, Mr. Prospect, and then share with you what we have. Or I'd like to understand your problems. But today's customer, our crazy busy customer, doesn't have time to work with a salesperson or entrepreneur who's looking to explore their needs. They want to work with an expert, an invaluable resource who already knows something. So let me share how I can use it in my profession. I have a target market of business-to-business sales organizations. That's who I work with virtually all the time. And I know that my key contact is the vice president of sales. Now, based on my knowledge of working with other VPs of sales in the business-to-business space, I can tell you that there are some major issues that are rampant that they're all facing. I already mentioned one, like new client acquisition. Another major issue that my clients are always facing is it takes forever to move things through the sales pipeline. So I can, with some degree of accuracy, have now, knowing that, I can have the ability to contact other people who are in similar situations and literally contact any VP of sales and say, look, I work with a lot of VPs of sales in business-to-business sales organizations, and I know that one of the key issues that you're facing is new client acquisition. I've got some ideas that can help you in this area. Let's set up a time to talk. And when you focus on messaging like that, you absolutely do get people's attention. And you can find out when you have that conversation with them, you can then find out specifically how that issue or challenge is playing out in their organization. But they don't want to talk with you and have you ask, what keeps you up at night and what are your biggest problems? They assume you will know that.
That's right. You've got to be at the stage where you're ready to have that high-level conversation with them.
Yes. And if people don't know that information, they should go to their existing customer base. If they've started their own company, they usually have some background in the arena that they're going after. If they've converted any new customers in the last year and a half or so, and landed any customers, they should be talking to people about why they're making the change and what are the issues behind the change. How are they evaluated? What are their business objectives? What kind of strategic initiatives do they have in place right now to get there? And that'll give them the information they need to initiate a conversation, and then they can get more specific about their target, the one they're talking to at this moment in time.
Jill, I think another thing that's very important that I hear in the way that you're describing this that is also very, very much needed for people who are in the business-to-business space is to understand the stages of the process. Because you're very focused, and I know that what you're doing is you're saying, how do we get just from step 1 to step 2, from step 2 to step 3? We're not going to try to go from step 1 to step 16 in one leap. Is that true?
Yeah. That's absolutely true, and I don't think most people understand the systemic process nature of the sales process. And I ask people, what is your goal going into these meetings? And they say, well, obviously to get the sale. Well, in most cases, you're not going to get the sale in one call. And in many cases, it may take 6 to 10 calls over a period of months to be able to win the business of somebody. And we really need to be aware that it's a process. We need to move people to the logical next step of the process. In terms of for example, if we have an initial conversation with somebody and they're interested in our services, we might say, well, the logical next step would be for us to meet with for me to have another in-depth interview or meeting with this person, because usually these are people involved in the process and have some, part of the decision. So it would be logical to set up that meeting next. And it's a continual, slowly moving forward. But the minute you pounce as a salesperson and try to get the business too fast, the barricades slam up in front of you, and then they start throwing objections at you, and you start backpedaling and trying to recover. And that's the worst thing you can do, because you got so eager to move ahead and anxious to get their business. But if you can stop and realize that it takes 6, 8, 10 contacts over a period of time, you'll just work on moving people to the next logical step.
Jill, let's shift gears for just a moment. What are some things that you do, a handful of things that might be relevant to your own personal productivity? So on a daily basis, what are a couple things that you're always thinking about and focused on in order to grow your business?
Oh, I'm always focused on my website. I'll tell you that right now, because the way people make buying decisions is they automatically, if you do connect with them, they'll automatically go check you out online. They'll check out your company if they're going to meet with you. If you've sent them an email, if they're at all interested, they'll go to your website, and they'll look to see if you sound like you might be worth meeting with on your website. And I don't just mean you personally, but you as representative of a company. And most companies, by the way, have websites that are simply brochures online that tout about how we specialize in this and we're the leading that and we have robust solutions and we're scalable or, out of the box thinking. And most websites are very trite in that matter. Because I know how decision makers think, I know that everybody today needs to have a content-rich website that shows that you understand the problems and issues that your clients are facing, that you have case studies of people and what they've done to achieve different things, that you have perhaps a blog that shares expertise, you have white papers or e-books that people can download or checklists, things with more information. And when people see that, they really realize that you're a force to be reckoned with. So I really actually focus on my website as a key way of showing people I'm an expert and know what I'm talking about, but also as a way of generating leads. And so, again, from a productivity standpoint, it's very hard to constantly be trying to sell. You need to have your website as the attraction center, and it needs to be able to get people to sign up for different things, to enter them into your database so you can continue the conversation with them. And that's not a sales type of thing, but it's a huge, huge sales productivity, tool to have a decent website, because it's the yin and the yang, as opposed to, the sales force, selling is going out and the marketing and the website is the, pulling people in.
Right. And the other thing that's really important is probably to decide what you're good at. There are some people who do beautifully on video and make a great impression that way, and other people really ought to stick to ebooks.
That is exactly true, unless you choose to learn any of these things. But, the reality it is anytime you do any of this, whether it's writing or whether it's being on video or doing interviews like you're doing, anytime you do that, you have to realize it is a skill to be learned as well. And you can't just bop in and bop out and think you've done a good job. You really need to be focusing on what are people doing who are good at this and how can I continue to get better, so that it can demonstrate my company's expertise all the time.
Jill, I want to thank you for being a guest today on My Quest for the Best. One of the most important ideas that you shared is that being successful in sales is a learnable skill. And it's not something whether you have it or you don't have it, but if you approach it from the philosophy that you share, that people can be more successful in what they do by taking that approach. You've shared with us some of the important barriers to sales. You've talked with us about the keys with snap selling. And you've also helped us understand that differentiation is something that's really useful to have in the later parts of decision making, not up front, which is a mistake that's very common for people who are selling. Thank you so much for sharing your great insights and experiences today on My Quest for the Best.
Thank you so much for having me today, Bill. I appreciate it.